Welcome back to the Reading and Writing Podcast. My guest today is Geoff Rodkey, author of the new book, Lights Out in Lincolnwood. Geoff, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks. Glad to be here.
Sure. Well, if someone hasn't yet heard about your new novel, Lights Out in Lincolnwood, how would you describe the novel?
Well, it's a dark comedy that follows a family of four in an upscale New Jersey suburb over the course of 3 days after the entire technological infrastructure of modern society mysteriously collapses on a random Tuesday. So, everything that's electronic, phones, laptops, TVs, the power grid, any car manufactured after about 1975, they all just stop working. No explanation. And, and things go to hell pretty fast. Like within a day, the local Whole Foods is getting looted. By day two, all the soccer dens in town have started a militia. And in the context of the story, nobody can figure out, because this loss of technology has taken away their access to news, if this is a temporary situation, in which case it's just an enormous pain in the neck, or something more permanent, in which case they're, potentially looking at the collapse of civilization. And so the psychological disconnect and the place where a lot of the humor comes from is, when the story opens, the four primary characters, husband and wife, two teenage kids, they're all dealing with various personal problems, like, the kind of problems that occupy us mostly. Basic job stresses, substance abuse issues, college applications, peer group conflicts. And the thing that they have to wrestle with, as, when the lights go out, is this question of, like, at what point do I stop worrying about, like, the work deadline my jackass boss gave me and start focusing my attention on where we're going to find clean drinking. So that's the kind of, that's both the fun and the terror that are mixed up.
Gotcha. Well, do you remember the original idea or impetus that led you to writing Lights Out in Lincolnwood?
Yeah, it started, it all kind of grew out of Hurricane Sandy back in 2012. I live in Lower Manhattan, on the 10th floor of an apartment building with my wife. And at that time, we had three kids who were 12, 10, and 7. And we lost power and water for about 5 days after Sandy, which, for a lot of people, I should say, like, Hurricane Sandy was catastrophic. For us, it was more on the just, huge pain in the neck, like a week-long snow day kind of level. But because we not only lost power, but water too, we very quickly got reduced to, like, I would almost call it like urban forage to survive. We had to, like, every morning, the superintendent in our building had busted open one of the street hydrants and filled a big trash barrel with water. And so every morning I would go down with a bucket and I would haul up enough water up 10 flights of stairs to flush the toilet. And then once we'd taken care of that, we gather up the kids and we would march them like 20 blocks north to the part of Manhattan where power was still on, because it was this weird kind of, dichotomy where a big chunk of the city did not lose power at all. And so we would march them up there. We would, like, feed them, sandwiches at a deli. And then we would try to find, who are the friends who we can sponge on off today, and, like, go to their house and get a shower and charge our phones. And then we had to get back home. It was almost like Omega Band, where we had to get home before sunset because there were no street lights, and we also needed to cook dinner before the sun went down, because we did have, because of the sort of residual effects of 9/11, which we'd also been through 10 years before that. We actually did have enough drinking water. That was, like, the one thing we had stockpiled. That and, like, completely useless, like, plastic tarps and duct tape. That's sort of the result of some weird Homeland Security orange 2002. But we had the drinking water, but all we had to eat was, like, boxes of pasta, and that we could still boil it on the stove because the gas was the one thing that did still work. But once the sun went down, we couldn't see anything. We only had about, like, I think we had like 2 working flashlights, and we're just, terrified that we would run the batteries down. So we would, we try to be finished eating and just go to bed at 7 o'clock because there was nothing else. And anyway, so this is a very sort of, it was an experience that was like, we never felt like we were in danger. It wasn't terribly traumatic, but throughout it, and for the years after that, I just kept thinking, like, what if this went on longer or was more widespread? Like, what if we couldn't just walk 20 blocks to our friend's house? And in that sense of kind of helplessness in the face of modern technology where we have just outsourced all of our basic needs to these very complex systems that we don't have any control of. That was the thing that really kind of motivated the story. I wanted to explore that in a fictional.
Well, if I'm not mistaken, this is your first novel for adults. How did you decide to make the switch from kids' novels to writing Lights Out in Lincolnwood?
Well, this was sort of, it's almost like my third or fourth career reinvention as a writer. Like when I first got started, professionally in my early 20s, what I really wanted to be, and I've kind of always fundamentally been a cop. I wanted to be a political satirist. But the thing about that is it's not really a job. Like there was, after a couple of years of like, submitting, pieces to like magazines, you'd have to submit to 10 places and finally somebody would buy it and you get $250 for it. I realized like, the number of people who had the job title political satirist in America at that time, it was like the mid-90s, you could count them on less than one hand. And so I realized that I kind of needed to do something else. And I started writing screenplays. And I was a professional screenwriter for about 10 years. I wrote about 25 screenplays, of which, 21 never got made into movies. And the other 4 wound up being family films. There was a movie called Daddy Daycare, with Eddie Murphy, a Robin Williams movie called R.V., and a couple others. And it was weird because I never really set out to write family films or children's movies. They just have they happen to be the ones that got made out of all the ones that. And then after doing that for about 10 years, the film business, this is now like the late 2000s, was changing in ways where I felt like I can maybe keep this going for a few more years, but I'm not going to be able to keep this going for another decade. Because the business was just changing in ways that like they weren't making the kind of movies that I wrote. So I was like, well, I'm a comedy writer. What else can I do? And I'd never written a book before, but I'd grown up and that was kind of what I wanted to do when I was thought of myself as somebody who wrote books. But the thing I noticed was like most comedies like don't play that well as books. Like for whatever reason, that's just a hard sell for adult novels. But in the kids department, everything was comedy. Not everything, but like half the books. So I started writing. I thought, well, maybe that's of my time. And so I started doing that. I've now written about 10 children's books. But in the course of doing that, there were sort of limitations to what the subject matter that you can do. You're kind of limited to writing about characters who are 12 years and younger. And after doing that for a while, I also got to a point where, I was having some success at it and I was enjoying it on some level, but I had never really done what I really wanted to do, which was to write a novel for adults. And I thought to myself at one point a few years ago, I was like, well, if I only had one book left to write, what would that book be? And that turned out to be Lights Out. So that is the extremely long answer to a very short, simple question.
Well,
that's how I wound up writing.
Well, given the timing of book publishing, I'm curious. Are you thinking ahead and are you planning on to write, or have you written a second novel for adults at this point?
I haven't yet. The most of the time I've spent since I finished Lights Out in Lincolnwood. And by the way, I should say, like, it's a novel that I wrote almost entirely in 2018. And in the year and a half since then, it's turned into like a current events bingo card, which, like last June, during otherwise peaceful protests, like my neighborhood got looted in a manner that felt a little kind of like the looting that takes place in the book. January 6th comes along and the sort of, the armed, suburban white guys who, become a source of menace in the book are suddenly storming the Capitol. And then a month after that, the Texas power water outages were like super on the news for what happens. And that was that's been, but in the time since then, so I finished the book in 2019. And since then I've written 2 books in a children's series that I'm co-writing sort of with and for Kevin Hart, the actor.
Mm-hmm.
And I also wrote a screenplay adaptation of one of my last children's books, which is called Where That From, about a family of humans. And so that's sort of what's occupied my time. And I'm only just now, as Lincolnwood is starting to come out, I'm only just now thinking about what the next book for adults.
Well, as you've talked about, you started out your writing career as a screenplay writer, and you just mentioned you worked on a screenplay recently for one of your recent children's books. I know that screenplays tend to be very structured, and I'm curious, when you are working on a novel, do you kind of carry that over in terms of outlining and planning before you write the novel?
Oh yeah, completely. And I mean, it's been enormously helpful to have had that kind of that practice of screenwriting, which is a very, very structural kind of. It's almost, the sort of the structural rules, and you can occasionally break the rules parallel of screenwriting. It's almost like haiku in the sense of, a good screenplay will have, very sort of relatively clearly delineated act breaks, and it will all kind of proceed in a way where the plot is really foremost. And that's like, it was really, really helpful when I started writing books. And I haven't really changed my process at all, which is to just, I start with an idea and I take notes until that sort of coalesces outline. And then I just keep adding to the outline until I get to a point where, I almost kind of, there's a weird sort of itch that I'll get at some point where I just feel like it's enough outline. I should just write it. But by the time I start writing, I usually have like I know the beginning, middle, and the end of the story, whether it's a book or a screen. So that was enormously helpful training.
Sure. And I'm curious, what is your collaboration process like with the Kevin Hart novels that you're writing?
Black Friday starts now at JCPenney. And this Friday through Sunday, shop early and save with thousands of new Black Friday deals while they last. Sparkle everyone's stocking with up to 75% off all fine jewelry. Plus, stock up on Home Expressions bath towels, now only $2.99 each. These deals and many more end Sunday. Happy Black Friday, JCPenney. Offers valid on select items 11/5 through 11/7. Exclusions apply. See store or jcp.com for details.
Well, it's been, he's been great to work with. Like I can't, with all the sort of, and I don't know if he's my collaborator or my boss, but I think it's a little, it's a little of both, but, he's fantastic on both, and really like the hardest working person. So, we would sit together, he originally the idea, he came to me with kind of half an idea and I kind of fleshed it out, and we sat and we talked with each other, both in person and on the phone, until we really worked out the whole out of everything that should be in the book. And then it was sort of my job to convert, the outline into a book. So a lot of the actual, the sentence by sentence writing, was I would do it and then I would send it off to him and then he would look it over, make his changes. But the larger structural stuff was very much, kind of the two of us together.
Gotcha.
And it's worked out pretty well. We just finished the second book and, hopefully there are more because it's been really fun. It's a work process.
That's great. Well, what writing advice would you offer for those who are working on their own stories and novels?
I think, fundamentally, like, write the story that you want to see in the world. Like if you're writing a book, think like, what's the book that if I saw it in a bookstore, I would be like, oh my God, yes, I really want to read. And then write that. And that's something, Lights Out in Lincolnwood is very much that kind of a story. But I would say over the course of, 25-year career, I haven't always done that. There have been times when, I was especially mostly in the film business, but I was writing the stuff that the market was kind of dictating. Wasn't exactly what I would have written if it was just me trying to satisfy me. And that stuff always makes me just feel worse. in the process. And then the end result, even if it's commercially successful, it's just something about it that it's not quite as pure. So I would really focus, try to not to think too much about a market, and just try to really write the thing that's going to make you happy, whether it gets published or not. And then the other thing is it's the hardest part is getting started. And I think that's true, on a global level, in terms of just having the courage to try to write a story in the first place, but also on just sort of the micro level of getting up and going to work in the morning. The hardest part of my day is the first 5 minutes, because there's even if it's something I'm excited to work on, there's always this resistance of maybe I should have a snack, or should I, I'm just going to spend 5 more minutes looking at Twitter. And it's just, and that kind of, there's something about it. I don't know what it is about writing, but I have this natural resistance to it. But if I can make myself, close my web browser, literally write a sentence, usually all of a sudden it's 2 hours later, and the time has gone by and it's gotten a lot easier. But it's just, if you're having trouble getting started, everybody has trouble getting started, and just kind of, if you can just write a sentence, the other sentences are going to get a lot easier.
That's great. Well, what novels or nonfiction books or even movies that you've seen that you've either read or watched lately that you enjoyed and that you would mention?
So the ones, which I picked up on an airplane, and I think I read it. It was a cross-country flight. I think I read it for 6 hours straight until I finished it. It was fantastic. And I just started Elif Batuman's Idiot, which is it's a comedy about a first generation immigrant college student that's got a very specific and just really awesome sort of comedic tone of voice. I really enjoyed that. In terms of nonfiction, there's a book I'm slowly making my way through on my nightstand called The Republic for Which It Stands, which is I think it's by a guy named Richard White, and it's part of the Oxford history of the United States, and it's about the United States for the period immediately after the Civil War through the end of the Gilded Age. And it's been oddly hopeful reading that, because as depressing as it can be reading the news, when you read about American history going back 150 years, it's always been screwed up. And we've somehow gotten through it. So it's, and particularly I just finished the section about Boss Tweed's New York City, and the level of corruption is just staggering. So it's, as I look at sort of, New York City politics right now, I'm it used to be so much worse. So that makes me oddly hopeful for the future.
You're right. I've actually commented several times, and of course, I mean, we all lived through Trump, but I've commented several times that almost never in conversations about Trump did you ever hear anything about Huey Long, and he was very, very similar.
Oh yeah,
he was a populist and really said I'm for the working man, and meanwhile he was beyond corrupt. Nothing came in or left Louisiana without him getting $1 in his pocket.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And it's a very, it is a very common political figure going back all the way to the Roman Republic, thousands of years. It's the more you know about history, the more you do see that it might not completely repeat itself, but it totally arrives.
Right.
Yeah.
So where can people find you online if they want to learn more about you and your novel Lights Out in Lincolnwood and your various kids' novels as well?
So there's, I have a website, geoffrodkey.com. By the way, it's spelled Geoff for reasons that my Midwestern parents have never been able to explain to satisfaction. But it's geoffrodkey.com, which there's not a ton of information on it except on the About page, which has a good sort of reverse chronological history of my career. And then I'm on Twitter and Instagram under Geoff Rodkey. And they can always email me. There's a contact page on the website too. Very happy to answer emails.
Great. Well, again, we've been speaking with Geoff Rodkey, author of the new book, Lights Out in Lincolnwood. The book is on sale now, so go buy a copy. And Geoff, thanks for doing this interview.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Geoff.
Great. Now, stay tuned for a brief excerpt from the audiobook of Lights Out in Lincolnwood by Geoff Rodkey, performed by Allison Ryan, Fred Berman, Jesse Valinsky, and Mark Sanderlin. Available from Harper Audio, wherever audiobooks are sold.
We're out of yogurt. It was less a statement than an accusation, which Dan delivered in a tone of wounded sorrow as he stared into the open refrigerator. Its top shelf, where the big tubs of Greek yogurt usually sat, was desolate, except for some leftover olives in a plastic Whole Foods tub, and that 2-year-old jar of pineapple salsa he'd bought by accident and couldn't bring himself to throw out, even though nobody in the house wanted anything to do with the salsa defiled by fruit. The target of his accusation wasn't listening. Jen sat at the kitchen table in front of a mug of coffee, wearing the Michigan t-shirt she'd slept in, and staring dead-eyed at her phone. On its screen was a chunk of text from an article in the nutrition and fitness section of the New York Times app titled, "How to Stop Yourself from Crying." Upon seeing the headline as she scrolled, Jen's initial reaction had been amused contempt. When did the Times start running articles that Women's Day rejected? But that had quickly given way to a second, much less cynical thought. Maybe this could help. Unfortunately, 3 paragraphs in, she'd realized the article was pitched exclusively to readers who didn't want to quit crying so much as they just wanted to quit doing it in front of other people. Jen did her crying alone, usually in the upstairs bathroom on school days when nobody was home. And the Times apparently felt this was either not a problem at all or so grave as to be beyond its capacity to fix. It was hard to tell which. Either way, by the time Dan issued his yogurt indictment, she'd stopped even trying to read the article. Her eyes were still fixed on the screen, but her mind had wandered off to wrestle with the binary choice that had come to dominate her weekdays. Will I or won't I? No, not today. Well, maybe. No, Jesus. But didn't you go shopping yesterday? Having failed to engage his wife's attention through passive aggression, Dan was trying again, without the passive part this time. I thought you were going to... Jen! Finally, she turned her head from the phone. What? Why didn't you go shopping yesterday? I did. I got dinner. Dinner had been lasagna and sautéed spinach carried out from Delectables, an overpriced gourmet place on Hawthorne Avenue that only sold prepared foods. She'd chosen it late Monday afternoon over more versatile shopping alternatives for a simple reason she didn't dare articulate to Dan. It was possible to drive to Delectables and back by executing only right turns. Why didn't you get breakfast stuff? I was working. I put in a fresh direct order. I don't know why it hasn't come yet. Jen's laptop was on the table, halfway between her and Max. She moved her coffee mug to clear a path and dragged over the laptop. Before she opened the screen, she reached out and smacked her 14-year-old son's free hand. Max was wearing a pair of massive blue headphones that dwarfed his skull, making him look like some kind of cyborg monkey as he shoveled cereal into his mouth while watching a martial arts video on his phone. Its cracked screen lay flat beside the cereal bowl, little pinpoints of splashed milk speckling the image of a shirtless, steroid-swollen man in a mohawk who was conducting a tutorial on the mechanics of an elbow smash to the face. What? Max snapped. Quit staring at your screen. Jen scolded him as she clicked on the fresh direct link in her browser bar. You're staring at yours? I'm staring with a purpose. So am I. What his mother didn't know, because Max would have sooner cut off a finger than explain it to her, was that the elbow to the face video was no idle entertainment. It was source material in a research project with serious implications for his future. I think we should all stop staring at our screens, Dan declared.
Black Friday starts now at JCPenney. And this Friday through Sunday, shop early and save with thousands of new Black Friday deals while they last. Sparkle everyone's stocking with up to 75% off all fine jewelry. Plus, stock up on Home Expressions bath towels, now only $2.99 each. These deals and many more end Sunday. Happy Black Friday, JCPenney. Offers valid on select items 11/5 through 11/7. Exclusions apply. See store or jcp.com for details.